بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Today, inshallah, I hope to talk about Ramadan and neurodiversity. How can we make Ramadan easier for our brothers and sisters who are neurodiverse or for our children who are neurodiverse? In this brief talk, I'm not going to be able to go into neurodiversity in detail. Inshallah, that will hopefully be for another time, but I do want to give some practical strategies. So what do we mean by neurodiversity? Neurodiversity means that the brain operates differently to the majority of the population, and this is usually a developmental condition. So it includes conditions such as autistic spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, and various other conditions. Sometimes there isn't an actual label, but you know that there are traits of something. And we should, really factor this in because 25% of the population has some form of neurodiversity. That's a lot of people. If we look at the adult population, we would know that the majority of people probably aren't even diagnosed. So we're picking up these rates, perhaps from our children. I think perhaps the rates might be even higher. In terms of the autistic spectrum condition, this is a condition often where people struggle with social communication and they may have restrictive behaviours. But the important thing is that it has a direct impact on their everyday life. It is thought that 1 in 60 children in the UK have autistic spectrum disorder, and it's thought that this rate may go up to 1 in 4 at some point if we continue to increase along this trajectory. So the trajectory rates are very, very high. And likewise, we're seeing an absolute explosion of diagnoses, particularly following COVID. So I want to talk about how we can make Ramadan a bit easier for our families and for our community, particularly our brothers and sisters who suffer with, or not suffer with, who are wired differently to us. They are differently abled, and of course their challenges are different, and things that they are talented at are different as well. So the first thing that is probably very, very helpful is to have a look at basic things like routine. So neurodiverse children, particularly those with autism, find transition quite difficult. So it's really important to start preparing for Ramadan in advance, to talk to your children, tell them what to expect, tell them what, to have a discussion around what you might want on the menu at suhoor and at iftar, what the routine might be around it. So, how you'll eat, and then you'll go and pray, and then you come back and have your dinner, and then you may go to the mosque, so that there's clarity. And sometimes these children find visual aids really, really helpful. So you could put up a visual aid on the fridge. You could also put up like a Ramadan, Advent type calendar. So they tick off a day at a time, or put a star in there. So that can often be really, really helpful. It's really important to recognise that a proportion of people with neurodiversity, particularly with autism, will have a crossover with other significant mental health conditions. So often there can be a crossover with eating disorders, things like severe depression, anxiety, and also more serious mental health conditions such as bipolar disorder and psychosis. So it's really important that people who are mentally very unwell, particularly if they're on medication or have a track history of becoming quite unwell, should consult with a doctor before fasting. It may not be suitable for them to fast because there is a risk that they could become very unwell and require hospital admission, or may require a lot longer to recover. A cohort of people with neurodiversity, particularly with autism, also have a difficulty with their food. This is not just in the form of perhaps an eating disorder. So we know that a lot of children have been presenting perhaps with anorexia and eating disorders as a result of COVID. And many of them may also suffer from generalized restricted eating. So only eating beige foods, for example, or foods of certain textures or flavors or certain brands only. And again, this is on a case-by-case basis. Often the mainstream advice is that if you have an eating disorder, it's probably not safe to fast, especially if it's an active eating disorder where food is being restricted, or there's binging and purging, or there's exercise addiction, or there's loss of desire in food, loss of appetite. The aim of Ramadan is not to starve but to actually train us and to restrain the desires. So it's really important to take these on a case-by-case basis. If someone has got eating difficulties and they are neurodiverse, the most important thing is perhaps to assess their fitness to fast, and to see what that fasting might look like. Are they able to tolerate it? Are they likely to have meltdowns or outbursts as a result? What things can be done to make their sensory environment more calming? For example, the noise, the environment, looking at the school day, all those things, or the work, the demands of work. So all those other things that can cause sensory overload need to be reduced. And again, you need to look at putting on food that they can manage at suhoor and iftar, and making sure they know what they're going to be eating. So that can help. Some children will have more significant eating difficulties, or adults, in fact, and they probably should not be fasting, or they should not be fasting every day. They should fast according to their ability, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants ease for us and He does not want hardship. But of course, they'll be rewarded, for their struggle and sacrifice. Other things that are important on the topic of environment, often social anxiety and social interactions can be challenging for these individuals. So it's worth thinking about, particularly if you've got family members who are neurodiverse, whether they can cope with busy iftars and socials and parties. It might be easier actually to have a small gathering in your own home, and perhaps with, a couple of their close friends or with some close family members, rather than a big celebration or a big iftar party, which they might find difficult to manage, not just because of the number of social interactions, which can be quite tiring for people who are neurodiverse, but also because of the smells and colours and sensory overload, which might be quite hard. The same thing comes for sort of Taraweeh and night prayers. So there are two aspects here. One is the social aspect of going to the mosque. And of course, we are a community. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described us in the Quran as Ummatan Wasata, a middle path nation. And our worship is communal. Inshallah, the Prophet will intercede for us as his ummah. But we have to bear in mind that some of our brothers and sisters might find it very difficult to go to a packed out mosque. And it might be easier for them to either pray at home, remembering it's a voluntary prayer, or to go to a smaller local mosque where they don't have to deal with as much noise and as many social interactions, or to pray in a smaller room in the mosque. So all these things would be options for them. And as a family and as a community, if we can be aware of this, it becomes a lot easier for us to work cohesively. So these are the main things. The other issue with night prayers is sleep. So often children and adults who are neurodiverse can suffer with a lot of sleep disturbance, and problems with their circadian rhythm, so their body clock. This can mean that they can have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep, and that can have an impact on the whole family. So again, it's important to think about what things are important in helping maintain good sleep hygiene during Ramadan. Sometimes the circadian rhythm can be a bonus. It can help with night prayers, but sometimes it can lead to sheer exhaustion. So it may be a case of seeing doctor beforehand and seeing whether you need some antihistamines or something to help you with a bad night, so that you can get enough sleep before the night prayers, before suhoor time, or to help fall asleep beforehand. And that could look like perhaps some antihistamines. Sometimes people are prescribed melatonin, but if it's occasional use, an antihistamine might be okay. And for adults, of course, you can buy something over the counter to that effect as well. Maintaining a regular sleep routine is really important. So doing all the other things you would normally do, rather than just crashing out after you've eaten and you've had social interaction at Taraweeh, that's quite stimulating. So you might still need your shower, or need to do your dhikr, or have some calming essential oils, or have a massage, or play some Quran or white noise to help you fall asleep. So do maintain that routine as much as possible. And I think lastly, the most important thing to remember is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not burden a soul beyond what they can bear, and their test is according to their power. So, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what we're juggling and what we're struggling with, and what our neurodiverse brothers and sisters are facing. We're not there to judge one another, but to know that as long as we are doing things with the right intention, to the best of our ability, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who rewards the intention, rewards the action. like to finish off by reminding us the way that I look at neurodiversity is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that He's created us as nations and tribes so that we may know one another. And that is the beauty. If we were all one homogeneous species, all thought the same way, lived the same way, felt the same way, even practiced our religion the same way, I think there would be no growth and we wouldn't meet the needs for surviving on this planet. We need one another and we need to work collaboratively. I was really impressed when I was reading this book, written by Professor Baron Cohen, who is Professor of Autism at Cambridge, and he was talking about how the Israeli army actually recruited autistic people to spot patterns in the sky. So they've actually nailed it. They've identified that people have different strengths, and we need to actually support all members of our community, rather than making the subject a taboo, or hiding behind things, or not discussing things, or actually just pretending the issue doesn't exist, or shying away. And this is an issue that's often not discussed. So let us remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made us different, made us beautiful, made us interdependent as a species. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings ease to everyone this Ramadan. Ameen.